I'm a 29-year-old woman living in a quiet suburban neighborhood where time seems to pass at a leisurely pace. It's the kind of place where the streets are lined with neatly trimmed lawns and flower beds, and the air is filled with the hum of distant lawnmowers or the occasional bark of a dog. Neighbors wave hello as they pass by, but conversations rarely go beyond a polite exchange about the weather or a friendly nod. It's a comfortable, predictable kind of place where you can go days without really knowing much about the people who live around you. My husband, who's 32, and I bought our house 3 years ago. It's a modest two-story with a white picket fence and a backyard that catches the late afternoon sun just right. We've settled in well, enjoying the routine of weekend yard work and evening walks. For a long time, everything felt smooth and uncomplicated until recently, when the piece of our little bubble started to unravel. Next door to us lives Tom and Sarah, a couple who have been married for around 5 years. Tom is 35, with a kind smile and a habit of washing his car every Saturday morning, while Sarah, 30, has a warm, easy laugh and a knack for organizing neighborhood gatherings. They have 2 young kids who you can often hear playing in the backyard, their laughter spilling over the wooden fence into our yard. The whole family has always seemed like the picture of suburban happiness. The kind of neighbors who host summer BBQs and invite everyone over for grilled burgers and corn on the cob, their patio lights twinkling as dusk settles in. Though my husband and I don't socialize with them outside of those casual neighborhood events, there's a friendly familiarity between us. We'll chat for a few minutes when we see each other out in the yard, usually about harmless things like Tom's latest home improvement project or how fast the kids seem to be growing up. We know just enough about each other's lives to feel connected in a vague, neighborly way, without crossing into the territory of real friendship. At least, that's how it was before things began to change, and I started noticing signs that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. About 2 months ago, I began to notice small, curious details that didn't quite sit right. It started as just a vague feeling, a sense that something was out of place. My office window overlooks the quiet, tree-lined street, giving me a clear view of the comings and goings in the neighborhood. It's the kind of street where routines are easy to spot, like the older couple across the road who walk their dog at exactly 7:30 every morning, or the mail carrier who never misses a step in his predictable route. So when I began seeing a woman pulling into Tom and Sarah's driveway during the day, it caught my eye. She always arrived around mid-morning, just after the kids had left for school and Sarah was long gone for work. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was well dressed in casual but stylish clothes, a light sweater draped over her shoulders, sunglasses perched on her head like a delicate accessory. She could have been a friend, stopping by for a quick coffee, or maybe a relative checking in. But then I began to notice a pattern. Her visits weren't just occasional. They became regular, appearing like clockwork 2 or 3 times a week. The way she carried herself struck me as odd. There was a carefulness in her movements, almost as if she didn't want to be seen. She would step out of her car and glance quickly up and down the street, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear before hurrying up the driveway. Tom would open the door just before she knocked, as if he'd been expecting her, and they would disappear inside together. At first, I convinced myself I was overthinking it, chalking it up to a neighborly visit or a project they were working on. But with each passing week, her presence grew more familiar, and so did the unsettled feeling in my gut. Something about it didn't seem right, and I couldn't help but keep watching. One warm afternoon, I was crouched in front of my garden, fingers deep in the cool soil as I pulled out stubborn weeds that seemed to multiply overnight. The sun hung high above, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, and a light breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass. As I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, the soft purr of an engine caught my attention. I glanced up just in time to see a sleek, black car roll into Tom and Sarah's driveway, its polished surface gleaming under the midday sun. The car door swung open and a woman stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she walked towards the front door. Her fitted dress hugged her figure, and her hair, perfectly styled, bounced lightly with each step. A moment later, the door opened and there was Tom, greeting her with an expression that seemed too enthusiastic for just a casual visitor. His smile stretched wide, a little too wide, and lingered just a bit too long. As they stood on the doorstep, I noticed how close they were, how their bodies leaned ever so slightly towards each other, as if pulled by some magnetic force. Tom's hand brushed against her arm in what seemed like a casual gesture, but there was something about the way his fingers lingered on her skin, a familiarity, an ease that made my chest tighten. Her laughter floated through the air, light and playful as she tilted her head, giving him a look that was almost coy. It wasn't that they were doing anything overtly inappropriate. There were no stolen kisses or obvious displays of affection. But the way their eyes locked, the way their bodies angled toward each other, spoke a language that felt too intimate for mere friends. I felt a strange knot form in my stomach, an uneasy sensation I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was nothing, probably just my imagination running wild. After all, what did I know about their relationship? Shaking my head, I returned my focus to the garden, trying to brush off the uncomfortable feeling. I dug my hands back into the soil, but my eyes kept drifting back towards their front door, where the woman and Tom disappeared inside together, leaving the faintest trace of tension hanging in the air. A few weeks slipped by, and the woman kept appearing, always during the hours when Sarah was away at work. Her visits followed an erratic schedule, sometimes staying for just an hour or two, other times lingering well into the afternoon. On a few occasions, she and Tom would leave together in his car, only to return later, their faces flushed and laughter trailing behind them like a shared secret. Each time I saw her silver sedan pull up to the curb, a sinking feeling settled deeper into my stomach. There was a furtiveness in the way Tom would open the door for her, glancing over his shoulder before letting her inside with a swift motion, as though he was trying to usher her away from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. The more I noticed, the more the situation gnawed at me. I brought it up to my husband over dinner one evening, keeping my tone light, though my unease was obvious. He paused, setting down his fork, and listened as I recounted the strange visits. It does sound a bit unusual, he admitted, but don't jump to conclusions. Maybe she's a friend helping with some home project, or something. He tried to shrug it off, but there was a hesitation in his voice, as if he wasn't fully convinced either. For a moment, I let myself believe it was nothing, just a harmless series of visits. But then, things took a turn that left no room for doubt. It was a warm afternoon, and I was in the garage sorting through old boxes when I heard voices drifting in from Tom and Sarah's backyard. The garage door was cracked open, letting in a sliver of sunlight, and through the gap, I could see a shadowy figure pacing near the fence. The woman was there again, her voice sharp and strained as she spoke, while Tom's replies came in low, tense murmurs. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their windows were open, and the argument was hard to ignore. I froze, my breath hitching as I heard Tom's voice rise above the murmur, clear and unmistakable. Sarah can't find out. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever was going on between them was far more than a casual visit, and it was clearly something Tom intended to keep hidden at all costs. The days that followed were tinged with a tense, uncomfortable energy. I tried to go about my routine as usual, but I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I was witnessing something unravel. The woman continued to show up, and their interactions seemed to grow more secretive with each visit. Tom would usher her inside quickly, and within moments, I'd noticed the blinds being drawn shut. The house, which was once open and filled with sunlight, now felt like a darkened stage set for a drama that played out behind closed curtains. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of Tom peeking through the window, his eyes darting to the street as if checking for witnesses. It was as though the walls themselves were conspiring to hide whatever was happening inside. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but curiosity and an unsettling sense of obligation gnawed at me. I needed to know the truth. So one day, when the woman arrived again, I made an excuse to be outside. I wandered to the side of the house, where the garden beds hugged the brick walls, and pretended to be absorbed in watering the hydrangeas. As I glanced up, my heart sank. Through the sheer curtains of the living room window, I saw them standing close together. Too close. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and his arm encircled her waist. They weren't talking. They were locked in an embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no room for doubt. The sight of them shattered any last thread of denial I'd clung to. My stomach tightened, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. I turned away, feeling as if I had trespassed on something vile, yet I couldn't shake the image from my mind. There was no more wondering, no more giving the benefit of the doubt. Tom was cheating on Sarah, and I was left with the heavy knowledge of a secret that wasn't mine to keep. Guilt surged through me like a tidal wave, cold and heavy, pressing down on my chest. I hadn't intended to stumble onto the secret, but now that I had, it felt like a burden I was forced to carry. I couldn't just unsee it, couldn't just rewind time and pretend I didn't know what was happening right next door. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Tom's familiar grin, friendly, genuine, the kind of smile that made you believe he was a good guy. He was always out in the yard, laughing with his kids, tossing a football around, or chatting over the fence with neighbors. It was the picture of a wholesome family man. But now I was starting to question everything. How much do we really know about the people we wave to from across the street or nod to in passing? What goes on behind closed doors, in the private spaces where their real lives unfold? And then there was Sarah, sweet, bubbly Sarah, who always greeted me with a warm wave when she saw me in the yard. I didn't know her well, but I knew enough to see that she adored her kids and seemed happy in her marriage. She didn't deserve to be kept in the dark. But even as the thought formed in my mind, another voice chimed in, urging me to stay out of it. What if I was missing pieces of the puzzle? What if Tom and Sarah had problems I wasn't aware of, or some kind of arrangement I didn't understand? The last thing I wanted was to be the one who tore apart their marriage or created a rift in the neighborhood. My hesitation nagged at me, twisting my insides with uncertainty. When I shared my concerns with my husband again, his response was as firm as ever. Mind your own business, he said, his tone final, as if the matter was settled. If you tell Sarah, you'll just create chaos and we'll end up in the middle of it. He wasn't wrong, but it didn't make it any easier. Each time I saw Sarah in the driveway, buckling her kids into their car seats or pulling groceries out of the trunk, a wave of nausea rolled over me. She had no idea what was happening right under her nose, and it felt like I was complicit in a terrible lie by keeping silent. Then, just last week, everything unraveled. I was sitting in my home office, scrolling through emails and half-heartedly sipping my coffee, when I saw her again, the woman who had been visiting Tom. She pulled into the driveway, her silver car glinting under the midday sun. I couldn't help but watch as she knocked on the door and Tom welcomed her inside, his hand lingering on her arm a little too long. But this time, something was different. An hour later, Sarah's car appeared, pulling up to the curb far earlier than usual. My heart skipped a beat. What was she doing home at this time? Did Tom and his visitor know she was back? I sat there, frozen in my chair, my mind racing through the possibilities of what might happen next. Should I warn them? Should I somehow intervene? But before I could even move, I heard the front door creak open and then slammed shut. The sound seemed to echo down the street, as if announcing the chaos that was about to unfold. Peeking through the window, I saw Sarah step inside, her face a mix of confusion and concern. Moments later, the shouting started sharp, angry, the kind of raw emotion that fills a room and spills out into the air. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught the tone, the hurt laced with fury. How could you do this to me? In our own home. Her voice cracked, breaking through the stillness of the afternoon. It was painfully clear that she had walked in on them, that whatever secrets they had been keeping were now laid bare. I felt helpless, like a bystander watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. I stayed glued to my spot by the window, my breath catching in my throat as the argument dragged on, stretching what felt like hours, though I knew it was probably no more than 10 minutes. Then, suddenly, the front door flew open again, and the woman stormed out, her face flushed and her eyes wide, as though she had seen a ghost. She didn't look back as she got into her car and sped away. Tom emerged a moment later, pacing the front lawn like a man who had just lost everything. His face was pale, his movements frantic, like someone searching for a way out of a nightmare. I could hear my husband's footsteps approaching as he walked into the kitchen, and together we watched through the glass, unsure if we should step outside and offer support or keep our distance. We didn't have to decide, though. Tom climbed into his car and drove off before we could take a single step. That night, the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The silence felt thick and heavy, pressing down on everything. Even without knowing the details, everyone could sense that something had broken inside that house. I glimpsed Sarah through the window, sitting at her kitchen table, her hands cradling her head. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders trembling with the effort of holding it all together. In the days that followed, everything felt painfully awkward. Tom didn't return, at least not that I could see. His car remained absent from the driveway, and the house stood dark most nights. Sarah continued with the motions of her daily routine, taking the kids to school and running errands, but there was a hollowness in her eyes, as if she were sleepwalking through her life. I hadn't spoken to her since that day, and each time I saw her, a knot of guilt tightened in my chest. And now, I can't help but wonder if I should have done something sooner. Should I have told Sarah the moment I suspected the affair? Could it have saved her from the devastation that came when she found out on her own? Or would my involvement have made things worse? I feel trapped in this strange, invisible space where I'm not directly involved, yet I'm carrying the weight of a secret that doesn't belong to me. My husband still insists that keeping quiet was the right thing to do, but the guilt gnaws at me like a dull ache that won't go away. Every time I see Sarah struggle to wrangle her kids into the car or catch a glimpse of her weary face as she drags herself back from another grocery run, I'm reminded of my silence. I wonder where Tom is, and if he's regretting the choices that led him away from his family. I wonder if my inaction was a mistake, if my silence somehow contributed to their unraveling. What would you have done in my place? Should I have told Sarah earlier, given her the chance to confront the truth before it shattered her life? Or was it better to stay out of it, to keep my nose out of their marriage? Now that everything is out in the open, I find myself questioning whether I should reach out to her, offer some form of support, or if it's best to keep my distance and let the pieces fall where they may.